All right, today what I'm going to show you how to do is make a ring from a copper pipe and some wood veneer. So let's talk about the piping first. I've got 1/2 inch pipe as the smallest one, 3/4 inch pipe, and 1 inch pipe, which are all pretty common sizes. So essentially what I need to do is find a pipe that is slightly larger than my ring size without being way too big. So this is actually a size 3 ring. This is a size 10.5, and this is over a size 16. So most people will probably be picking the pipe here as it's up to a size 10.5. That means I'm gonna have to cut a little bit out of it. So that's probably going to be the size for most of you. So the other thing, raw materials kind of we need are some wood veneer. So you can see this is a variety pack I picked up, and you can find that on lots of places online. So let's talk about cutting the ring. So I've got 2 different blanks here, and you can see the difference. This one is already pretty clean, and this one is really rough. So I cut this one with a bandsaw just because I happen to have one. This one I cut with a pipe cutter, and they're both still very sharp. I wouldn't want to put them on my finger right now. It would probably cut me. So a pipe cutter looks like this, very inexpensive. They're about $8 or $9, and while it's a little bit slower, it's a good controlled way to cut a pipe, and will leave a pretty nice, neat cut. So I'm going to put it on this 3/4 inch pipe here just to give you an idea of how it works. So I'm going to line it up where I want it to be. So I've got my cutter wheel right there, and it's about 3/8 of an inch in, and I'm going to snug that wheel up against there, and then I'm going to turn. So you can either turn the pipe cutter or you can turn the pipe itself. Either will work. Once I've gone around a couple times, you'll feel it to start just kind of loosening up a little bit. So I can snug it up a little bit more, and it will take about 5 minutes to cut this, but it will leave a nice clean cut. Okay, I'm getting pretty close now. You can start to see the cut or the kind of forming on the inside, and I'm just going to keep turning, tightening up the wheel. And I can feel it starting to loosen up when it does that. Just tighten it up, and got my ring blank. So I'm ready to turn this blank into something that I can use, and the first step is going to be to sand it down and get rid of this sharp burr on here. That could be quite sharp. I definitely don't want to put it on my finger until I get rid of that. All right, so to start getting rid of the burrs and the leftover stuff, I'm using the rougher ring blank that I have here to demonstrate. I'm going to be using an 80 grit sandpaper. That's pretty rough sandpaper. The smaller the number, the rougher the sandpaper. And my goal is to just get rid of all this stuff that's hanging on here. So I'm going to take the ring and in a circular motion until I get rid of all these little frayed edges on here. As I continue to sand in that circular motion, these sharp little pieces will start to fall off. So I'll just continue that on this side and the other side. Once I've gotten rid of most of that extra stuff hanging off of there, I can switch to my needle file. And so I like this needle file. It's flat on this side, but it's rounded on this side, so it automatically kind of matches the shape of the ring. So I'm going to use this to just kind of take care of the last bit of that burr that is hanging out. And I can do that on the inside and the outside. I'm going to use the flat side on the outside just to knock that little bit of a burr off of there. Okay, once I've got the burrs off of the inside, outside, and have the sides here sanded, I'm going to go ahead and sand this part here just to make sure that I don't have any burrs left right there. Okay, so now I'm ready to start sizing this ring, which essentially means I need to cut a piece out of it so that it'll be small enough. So I'm going to use a Sharpie marker and a 90-degree square to draw my first line. This is what I'm going to use to split the ring. And I'm going to use a jeweler's saw to cut on that line. Alright, so I've got my jeweler's saw here, I've got my line. This is just a little ring station that I made. So now I'm going to cut on that line. And a couple things about the saw here. If I just start like this, it's going to bounce around. So I'm going to take another needle file and I'm going to just put a little groove right there for my saw blade to sit in. That will make starting this easier. The other thing I want to make sure to do is have some lube on the blade, which I've already applied. And you can break these blades really easily. So you got to be careful about that. And you'll feel right away which way it wants to cut. So this one is cutting on the back stroke. And I'm just going to follow along that line really carefully, trying to make sure I just remove that black line that I've got. And you can see that I broke my blade, which typically happens if you're pushing too hard. There are lots of things you can do to figure out the size of your ring. I have a key ring full of ring sizes on here. So this is a size 11, and it will go on my finger, but is pretty tight. You really want to avoid ever forcing a ring all the way onto your finger if you feel like it's not quite fitting. So this is a size 11 and it will go on. I'm going to go up to a size 12 though, so because with a wider ring you want it to be a little bit more comfortable, and it's best for this ring to end up being a little bit larger than a little bit too small. So there's a size 12. It fits on, slides off easily. So I'm going to go with the size 12. There's lots of things I can use to help me with this. This is a ring mandrel. This is actually for pounding and forming a ring on because it's made of solid steel. This is a ring sizer as well, and this one is not for shaping and pounding on. So if you don't have any of these things, the other thing you can do is just take your finger that you're going to put this ring on and start bending and forming this ring until it fits around that finger. And so once you get it to where you like the size of it, you'll just mark it and then you'll cut. So as you can see, I start to bend this and it starts turning into a round shape. So another thing, or a oval shape. So another thing I would want to use is a hammer just to kind of keep this in round. If instead of using expensive equipment, if you don't have any, you can also use, this is just a solid piece of ground rod, pretty inexpensive. Any kind of heavy-duty metal pipe will work as well, and I can use this to bend my ring around and form, and so I just have tape wrapped around it to make it up to my size. So that works as well. So I'm going to work to slowly get this ring to be the right size, and I'm going to mark what I need to cut off where they overlap. So to get this to be down to the right size, I'm going to use this hammer. again, I'm trying to make sure that it stays around. So, tape wrapped around there will help with that. So now they overlap and it's pretty flat. I'm going to slide up on my finger. Still a little on the loose side, so I'm going to continue to size that down a little bit from there. So I've got this pretty round and sized down some. As you can see, I'm still having a hard time getting it to be as tight as I want it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and, but it's pretty much circular, so that's the good news. I'm going to go ahead and kind of bend this in so that you can see I'm taking out some of that slack. Bend it in so that it's over top of my knuckle, and I can get an idea of how small that needs to be. And pull that off. Make sure to keep it nice and tight. And I'm going to go ahead and mark what I need to cut off of here. So with my marker, I've got that, and that will show me how much of that extra piece I need to cut off of there. So I'll go back to the ring cutting station and use my jewelry saw to cut that to size. Okay, now that I've got that piece removed, I'm going to work on cleaning up this joint right here. So the best way to fine tune this joint right here is to use a flat file. And essentially what I want is for those two pieces to come together equally. So I'm going to first off get them to where they match up so they're coming right together. And then I'm going to squeeze while pulling this file down in between them. And that'll make sure that these two match up nice and neat with no gap. And once I'm satisfied with the gap there, work on that a little bit more. Once I'm satisfied with that though, we'll be good to go to the next step. If you feel like your ring is still a little bit too large, you can repeat that process with a larger, more aggressive file to remove some of that material in there. To finish sizing it up, there's a couple things I need to do, so I'll get going on that. So I've got this wrapped tape around this rod, and as I squeeze it together you can see that's the right size. So to get it close to the right size, I can use this to bend it around and then start to hammer those together, and what that's going to do is try to keep it as round as possible. You can see that it still doesn't want to quite go all the way together, so that's when I have to take it off of there. And what I'm doing is looking to see, you know, how round is it, and trying to close that gap up. So what I'm going to do is gently tap it, kind of checking, seeing if I see like a bump sticking out. I'm going to tap those parts together and try to get this gap here to close up a little bit. I may not get it all the way, but I need to get it pretty close. And again, keeping the ring around so that those two edges match up. I feel like that's probably pretty good. So from here I'm ready to start working on my veneer. Alright, so I've got my chosen piece of veneer here. What I need to do is cut a strip of veneer that is just about 1/8 of an inch wider than my ring blank. That just gives me a little bit of room for error. So if I line that up there, leave about a 1/16 inch hanging over on either side, I can cut that off. So I'm going to hold my ruler in place and cut my veneer. So this is about a 12-inch piece. If I were to try to wrap that around there right now, it would break. So what I need to do is soften this veneer. Before I soften it, I need to taper this edge right here. So I'm using 120 sandpaper and just trying to get this to a nice point so that it doesn't have that flat edge. That will help wrap around there better. So I'm just really trying to get this first inch or so to taper down into a really sharp point right there. So I'm going to work the end of it just a little bit and then slowly work my way to the back. And again, you can see that I'm getting pretty sharp edge there. It's getting really thin, and really that's what I want. That'll help wrap it better. And I'm just going to feather that in so that it's not a drastic stop there either, and try to get that last inch or so taken care of. Because I'm going to put this in the pot with several other people's veneers, I'm going to go ahead and put my initials on this end right here. Got my trusty old crock pot here. I'm going to put that veneer in there carefully without burning my fingers, and the water in there is really hot. You can see it steaming, not quite boiling, but pretty close. And just going to leave the lid on there and keep that in there for about 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, so I ended up soaking my veneer for about 30 minutes. What I was looking for was being able to bend it pretty sharply. I'm going slowly, but not having any splinters or anything, so that tells me that it's ready. So I'm going to take my ring blank, I'm going to wrap it around my rod here, and again, this is set to my size of ring. Then I'm going to start again with the tapered end, and I'm going to wrap it around there. And as I wrap, I'm turning this and trying to make sure that it's squeezed together real good, and so that I don't have a gap in my ring. Again, it was still sprung quite a little bit, so as I'm pulling this tight, I'm rolling. Once I get all the way to the end, and I'm happy with the wrap, I'm going to use some 1-inch masking tape, and I'd recommend having this ready to go. Beforehand, or having a buddy to help you out. And I'm gonna tape that down now. So again, the wood is wet, so it's not gonna really stick very well. So I'm kind of relying on the tape to come around and stick to itself. So I'm just continuing that process of spinning it as I go. Once I get this wrapped all the way around, this is going to need to dry. So I can put this in a low temperature oven, 200 degrees or so, for a while, or I just can let it air dry. And what I'm looking for from the end here is a nice tight wrap on the veneer, no gaps, anything like that. So I could see I could get a little bit tighter right there. Alright, so I've got my veneer wrapped around my ring. I'm able to take it off of the little form here, and now I'm ready to stabilize it. So what I'm going to use is this thin super glue, and make sure I've got rubber gloves to make sure that I'm protecting my work area. And essentially what I'm going to do is let that super glue soak into the pores of the wood. So that's why we start with a little bit of a wider piece of tape around here, so that gives that super glue a place to kind of sit as it's soaking in. And I'm going to work just my way around, and once I've got some of it puddled up in there, I'm just going to keep turning it, let it soak in, being careful not to let it drip on myself especially. And as I see that it's starting to disappear, that means it's soaking into the wood there, and I'll add a little bit more. And eventually, if doing this long enough, it will stick to and ruin the glove. So I'm just going to keep an eye on that so it doesn't rip the glove and get on my skin. And that's why keeping it moving is important. And I don't know if you can see in the video, but there's a little puddle of it that's kind of moving around with me as I go. And just trying to make sure I get even coverage. Once I'm done with this side, I will, and I feel like that I've gone around, added glue twice, and I feel like that puddle has disappeared. I'll flip around and do it to the other side. Again, twice. Kind of let that glue disappear. And this glue is very strong smelling as well, and kind of burns your eyes a little bit, so it's best to stay back away from it a little bit. Okay, that's soaked in, so I'm going to add one more time. Again, just keep it moving. Alright, so I've let my super glue dry for a day. You can see that it's stuck to the paper. First thing I want to do is get rid of the extra tape around the outside. And the best way to do that is just to peel it off. Okay, so got that removed. So my next step is going to be to get rid of this extra residue from the tape and the glue that's on here. So I'm going to start with my 80 grit sandpaper and I'm just going to go in a circular motion, and I'm getting the extra veneer removed. I'm getting rid of the extra glue and that sort of stuff that's left over. Once I've got both of the sides evened up, take some time, flush with the copper ring, got all that extra veneer removed. Now I'm going to spend time working on this surface, and I'm just going to turn it. As I sand, you'll start to see the tape residue come off. You know, any more that you can peel off by hand is great. The rest of it will come off as you sand. Once I've got all the glue residue removed, now my job is going to be to come back and just kind of sand and make sure that the thickness of the veneer roll is the same. You can see it's a little thinner here and a little thicker there, so I'm going to work to just kind of even that out so that it gently flows from that thinner thickness to a more even thickness. Once I'm happy with the general shape and how much material is removed and the flatness of the sides, now I'm going to start progressing through finer and finer sandpaper grit. So I started with 80. I'm going to switch to 120, go over the whole thing, and essentially as I use the sandpaper, my goal is to remove the scratches that the coarser sandpaper left. So I'll go 80, 120, then 220, and then finally 320 to finish up. Again, starting with the sides, and then this surface. And rolling it as I go. Okay, once I've finished with the 320 grit, it's looking pretty smooth. Now what I want to do is take care of these sharp edges around the outside. So I'm going to jump back just a little bit to the 120 grit and hold the ring at an angle. Try to keep that same angle as I'm turning it. And it's not a 45-degree angle, it's a little more upright than that, but this is just going to help me knock off those sharp corners. Once I'm satisfied with that side, I'll switch to the other side. And when I'm done with the 120 grit, I'll go back through the finer grit paper for these edges, go to 220 and then 320, and then we'll work on the inside. Once I've got the outside edges eased over, just softened up a little bit, now it's time to work on the inside. So the first thing I can do is take my file, and again I like the one that is flat on one side, and then the other side you can see is rounded because the rounded side kind of matches up with the ring. And I'm going to ease over the inside edge of the ring. Again, trying to get a little bit of an angle on that. That's going to soften up the edge of the pipe there. And you can start to see that edge because it's changed shape. It's on that angle. Start to see it clean up. And I'll do that to both sides. So once I've got those cleaned up, now I'm gonna just take this again with the rounded edge down and go across here. The end of this, they call this a needle file because it's small and pointy, and it'll hurt. I've hit myself a couple times with it in the past, so you really want to be careful that you're providing yourself a safe distance away from your hand as you're working. So now I'm just coming across there and hitting that on the flat edge, and hopefully that'll remove any remaining burrs in there. Also want to do some sanding in here, so I've got just a little piece of 120 grit paper, and I'm going to work that on the inside. So I'm going to put my finger in there and twist the ring on that. And hopefully now just getting rid of any file marks that are left in there. And I will go down into from here 120 to 220 sandpaper and smooth out the inside. My goal with the 120 sandpaper is to get rid of any of that super glue that was on the inside and get rid of any tarnish marks, like you can see right there where those two come together and right there. And so what I'm left with should look like this. So I'm going to work that just a little bit longer, and I'm going to work on this edge right here with the file. You can see and kind of feel that that part right there is still a little sharp. Alright, so got my ring sanded down, feels good to the touch. What I'm going to do now is wipe it down with some mineral spirits, get rid of all the dust, and prepare it for spraying. So what I'm using to hang it, it's a piece of wire, and I'm using this section of one of these paper clips, and I've stretched it out a little bit and filed the ends so that it should go inside of there. And hold my ring nice and secure while I'm spraying it with minimal contact. So I'm gonna have this paint can handy when I'm working, and I can use that just to hang my ring after I'm done spraying it to get it out of the spray booth. Alright, so I've got my piece hanging here in the spray booth. Got my can of satin lacquer, and the biggest mistake people make when spraying anything is getting too close. So I'm about 10 inches away, about a foot away, and spraying too much on. So I'm going to start with really just trying to get it a little bit from each direction. Okay, and my setup here allows me to turn my piece around and get the other side now. Again, just kind of get it from a little bit from every direction. I'm going to let that sit for about 5 minutes or so. I'm going to come back and continue to put light coats on it, avoiding putting too much on so that it doesn't run.